So hi Brett, welcome. Tell me what the Thoughtful Discussion Group discussed last.
This last week we talked about complex systems and how we can't really live with them and we can't live without them.
And so what is a complex system?
That's a good question, and that's where we started with our discussion, trying to define terms. And what we came up with was that a complex system is a system that can't be modeled. And that seems like an odd thing, but it can't be modeled by a computer, logically modeled. There's just no way to model a complex system. And an example of that, something we try to model all the time, is the weather. Mm-hmm. It's way too detailed for us to actually be able to model it accurately. We can get close, but we're never going to be able to model it completely.
In my own experience, the models are even farther off recently than they were within a year or two ago.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe yeah, maybe no.
And we don't know why that is.
So can you tell me, how do random events, what role do random events play in all this?
So one of the complex systems we looked at, or one of the things that we posited might be a complex system, is bingo. But it turns out that bingo really isn't a complex system. The rules are pretty straightforward. It can easily be understood. Yet it can't really be modeled accurately for any given game because there's randomness involved. And you can never successfully model randomness. So while you can build a computer program that can play bingo, you can't ever predict how any individual bingo game is going to go.
So I guess, did you guys mention, so there are no like bingo sharks, are there? There's like you are.
That's right. There's nobody counting balls.
All right. So do you think it's possible for us to live without complex systems?
Certainly not in the society as we have it. The group discussed things like power grids, which are critically important to how we function today. And the loss of the power grid is brutal, as you've seen recently in South America. Additionally, there are things like computers that we use all the time, and it's very hard to predict exactly what a computer is going to do, and they're very difficult to model. As examples, you constantly get bugs reported in. They can never figure out how everything's going to interact. Mm-hmm. And our society today is dependent both on the electricity and the computers. I mean, even if you go back to the time of, say, hunter-gatherers, they had rather complicated systems for moving about and being in the right place at the right time for when fruit ripened, for example. Mm-hmm. And these were extremely complex systems that varied with the weather, that varied with water conditions, and all kinds of complexity tied into it. That makes it very hard to model how a primitive society would have been able to move effectively as hunter-gatherers. If they overgraze one area, then it's not available to them the following year, and so the impacts are very difficult to anticipate.
In discussing the hunter-gatherers, they may not even have had writing, maybe some kind of marking. So I guess their complex system had to all be in their head.
Well, so the part of the point is that it doesn't take intelligence to create a complex system, although there's no question there was intelligence involved. But the weather is a complex system and there's no intelligence involved there. And humans, just by virtue of interacting unpredictably with each other, start generating complex systems almost immediately as they start to gather in groups.
Could you maybe make a visual of what this randomness and complexity might... Can you draw me a picture?
Sure. By looking at a complex system, you're not just looking at something that's complicated. There are things that are very complicated that aren't really complex systems, like how to make a toaster. It's complicated, the process, and especially if you go back all the way to getting the ore for the metals, it's extremely complicated, but it's not complex. A complex system is something that cannot be modeled. So the weather is a very normal, average example of a complex system. Even some things like, there are people who argue that the subway system in New York is complex. It's too complicated. And there was a fantasy novel written by Deutsch which examined, well, what happened if some of these subway trains went into an extra dimension. And we did get sidetracked on that for a little bit.
So what's next week's topic?
Next week in honor of being out in the Roosevelt Center from 7 to 9 on Tuesdays. We're going to be talking about what do we have to fear besides fear itself? Do we have anything besides fear itself to fear? And we look forward to having people come and engage in that discussion. Just bring yourself.
I cannot wait to hear the results of that. Thank you very much. See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.